English. Are contractions, have contractions, is, has, not, will, shall, would, had, and, of course, miscellaneous other contractions, because it wouldn't be English if it didn't have exceptions. Ain't, which isn't actually a word, so we'll go over that. Cause, let's, ma'am, o'clock, and the inevitable y'all. Then we're going to go over some rules for doubling contractions, how to make a contraction twice in one word, and some general rules for using contractions in context. And we'll end, as always, with some practice. All right, what is a contraction? Well, a contraction is a group of two or more words joined together with each missing letter or group of letters replaced by an apostrophe. Contractions are usually quicker to write and pronounce than the words they replace. They're also considered less formal, and that's a little bit of a double-edged sword because they're less formal, they're sometimes frowned upon, as in some academic writing. You may be working on a dissertation or a master's presentation, and you may be told, don't use contractions, they're not considered professional, in which case, follow that rule. But sometimes contractions are required, as in any writing that requires a personal or friendly tone. If you're writing a chatty email to your friend and you never use contractions, you're going to sound like a robot. On the other hand, if you're writing to the head of your dissertation committee and you use contractions all the time, you're going to sound like you're 14 years old. So be very careful of context in using contractions. Now, one quick note about apostrophes, the punctuation mark used to create contractions, they're also used to create possessives. For example, Brian's cat or Ellen's keys. But these are not considered contractions because the apostrophe isn't actually replacing a missing letter or group of letters. You didn't remove anything between Brian and the S to create Brian's cat. You just stuck an apostrophe S on the end to indicate that the cat belongs to Brian. So it's not a contraction, it's a possessive, and we are going to be talking about contractions in this lesson. All right, our first kind of contractions are contractions. To form a contraction with the verb are, join it to the previous word, whatever it is, and replace the A with an apostrophe. So, we're going to the movies. We are becomes we're. We got rid of that A, and we replaced it with an apostrophe, and we got we're. That's exactly how we got they're always so much fun, and you're kidding, right? Now, in conversation, you can form an are contraction with any noun or pronoun that would normally use the verb are. However, this is considered highly informal if you're doing it with something other than a pronoun, and you should avoid doing it in your writing unless you are quoting spoken English. So, for example, you could say, the keys are over there. Well, in spoken English, there's almost no distinction in sound between the keys are over there and the keys are over there, especially in most dialects like the American dialect I speak. But if you're writing it and you put the apostrophe RE after keys, it looks a little funny, so only use it if you're quoting what somebody said out loud. Next, we have contractions. Now, to form a contraction with the verb have, again, you join it to the previous word, and this time you replace the ha, the HA, with an apostrophe. That's how we get you've said too much already, we've been collecting stamps for years, and I've come to say goodbye. Once again, you can form a have contraction with both nouns and pronouns, although noun contractions are still better in conversation than in writing, and with some verbs as well. So, for example, he would have been there if he could. That's short for he would have been there. Similarly, there is nothing I could have done. All right, let's look at is-has contractions. Now, to form a contraction with the verbs is and has, you form those two different contractions exactly the same way. You join the verb to the previous word, and you add an apostrophe and an S in place of the I or in place of the ha. So, tonight's been so much fun. That was originally tonight has been so much fun. Take off the ha, put it in an apostrophe, and you get tonight's. He's going home now. That would be he is going home now. Or what's that you say? What is that you say? Now, is-has contractions are quite common in both written and spoken English with both nouns and pronouns. They're pretty much the Wild West. You can do whatever you want. So all the world's a stage, my car's in the parking lot, Diana's been here, or a cup of tea's the cure for what ails you. Now, I realize that because these two verbs form contractions in exactly the same way, you may sometimes have some difficulty figuring out whether you're dealing with an is contraction or a has contraction, and naturally that would affect the meaning of the sentence. Well, luckily, there are pretty much no circumstances where you could use is or has and have them both sound equally okay. So when in doubt, swap both verbs in, see which one makes more sense, and then you know where the contraction came from. Now we have not contractions. These are some of the most common contractions in English. To form a contraction with the adverb not, join it to the previous word, always a verb, and replace the O with an apostrophe. Instead of putting the apostrophe in between what's left of the verb and the previous word, you put it in the middle of the adverb, replacing the O. So, I did not mean to hurt you becomes I didn't mean to hurt you. This isn't the way to Grandma's house, is not. You were not home, so I waited on the front step. Or Pablo could not, hurt a fly. To form a contraction out of will not, which of course is the future tense, use the special form won't. To form one from are not, use aren't. So I won't be able to attend your party, and you aren't listening to me. More commonly pronounced aren't instead of aren't, but trying to make it clear. All right, now we come to will and shall contractions. To form a contraction with the verb will or shall, join it to the previous word and replace all letters before the double L with the apostrophe. So he will or he shall be here soon becomes he'll. I'll bring snacks to the party tomorrow. We'll have a great time together. Now, you can form will-shall contractions with practically any noun or pronoun that takes will or shall, but this is another case where noun contractions are considered highly informal. Avoid using them in your writing unless you are quoting spoken English. So, the sun'll come out tomorrow, Annie sang. It's a famous song from a Broadway musical. If you're going to quote it, you have to quote her contraction, but if you use it in your PhD dissertation, you're going to get in trouble. All right, would-had contractions. Both would and had form contractions with nouns and pronouns by replacing all letters before the final D with an apostrophe. Use the context to tell them apart, just like you did with is and has. So, I'd been waiting for hours when she'd finally arrived. I had been waiting for hours. Do you think you'd like an ice cream cone? You would like an ice cream cone. They'd rather go home than stay here. They would rather go home than stay here. Now, you can technically form a would-had contraction with nouns as well as pronouns, but again, avoid doing this in written English unless you're quoting someone talking. So, Aunt Sally'd love to see you, my mother said. Very, very informal. You really don't want to use it in your writing unless you're talking to your best friend in the whole world or quoting your mother in my case. All right. Other contractions. There's a whole set of kind of funny little contractions that follow their own rules and aren't really part of any established scheme. Here they are. First is ain't. Ain't is used in some parts of the English-speaking world as a replacement for isn't or aren't. It is incorrect, or, as my grandmother used to tell me, ain't a word, and is considered a mark of poor education. Don't use it unless you are quoting. So, for example, in his song, I Ain't Blue, Spider John Kerner sings about feeling lonely on a rainy day. Well, the title of the song is I Ain't Blue. If you change the title of the song to I Am Not Blue, then you wouldn't be talking about his song anymore. So you have to say ain't because you're quoting. Similarly, my grandmother always told me, ain't a word. If I'm quoting my grandmother's saying, I have to say ain't. Outside of quotation, don't use ain't. Next, cause, with that funny backwards apostrophe at the beginning, is a common contraction for because. Note the reversed apostrophe to replace the missing be. Okay, you may have to look up how to do that in Microsoft Word. Cause is highly informal. Use it sparingly. So, for example, you're just jealous 'cause I won, the child said. Well, all right, if you're writing dialogue for a child can speak childishly and you can use cause. Next, d, with the apostrophe after it, is an informal contraction for do. It is used almost exclusively in spoken English and in quotations. So, do you want to get a hamburger? He asked. The d, in this case, stands in for do. Similarly, let's is a common contraction for let us. However, it doesn't mean allow us. It's a suggestion that the speaker and the listener take a certain course of action. It is acceptable in written and spoken English, except where all contractions are totally forbidden. So we could say, let's see what we have in this box. Perfectly grammatical in this case. Let's not fight about something silly. Again, perfectly grammatical. This is one of those contractions that works almost everywhere. All right, then we have ma'am. Ma'am is a contraction of madam. It is pronounced ma'am, or possibly mom or mum in some accents, and is a term of general respect for women, although some younger women prefer miss and will be insulted if you call them ma'am. It is acceptable in almost all written and spoken English as a female equivalent of sir. So, please come this way, ma'am. Can I help you, ma'am? All right, now we come to o'clock. O'clock is a contraction for of the clock, which we never actually say out all the way. We never say 3 of the clock or 5 of the clock. It's always 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock. It is used exclusively for time of day and only with round hours. So we'll meet back here at 3 o'clock, or it's 9:30 o'clock. There's no such phrase as 9:30 o'clock. You say it's 9:30 or 15:15, which means a certain amount of time beyond that nice round hour, 9 o'clock. All right, now we come to our last funny little contraction, y'all. Y'all is a contraction for you all. It is pronounced y'all and used in some parts of the world, especially the southern United States, as a substitute for the second person plural pronoun. We have a little bit of a problem in English that the second person singular is you, and the second person plural is also you. This can cause a certain amount of confusion, so in some parts of the United States, people say you all, or started saying you all, and it became y'all. However, y'all is highly informal and should be used only in informal conversation or quotation, and then only in contexts where its use is commonly expected. So if you're living in Texas, you can use y'all as much as you like. If you're living in Chicago, not quite so much. So, our example sentence, howdy y'all, the country singer shouted to his audience at the start of his concert. All right, if you sing country western music, you are expected to at least affect a southern U.S. accent or western U.S. accent where y'all is pretty common. So a country singer could be expected to say y'all. However, if you're running for president, it may or may not be a good idea. All right, doubling contractions. It is possible to create a double contraction, especially with had and would, not, have, and will, shall. This is grammatically correct, but it is highly informal and sometimes confusing to a reader who is unfamiliar with English. Avoid it in formal writing. So, if I had seen the problem, I'd have fixed it. This is short for, of course, I would have. I'd have is a lot shorter to pronounce and a lot shorter to write, but it can confuse someone whose first language is not English, so use it sparingly. Similarly, he'll have arrived by tomorrow night. He will have arrived. So this is how to do it, and it really does work, and you really can do it. I give you permission, but be careful. All right, here are some rules for using contractions. Contractions are almost always less formal than the words they replace. If we still use the original words at all, which is to say it's not o'clock, then the original words are pretty much always more formal. Contractions create a more familiar tone, so only use them if you want that tone. Now, some forms of academic and professional writing prohibit the use of contractions. In many businesses, it's considered bad form to use contractions in a business letter. It's often considered bad form to use contractions in a term paper in college. So whatever your institution says about using contractions, go by their rules. Never, 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 never use a contraction without the apostrophe. I don't care if your phone keypad doesn't necessarily have an apostrophe button. If you have an apostrophe key or the ability to write an apostrophe with your pen, always use the apostrophe. Using a contraction without the apostrophe either creates a misspelled word or it creates a completely unrelated one. So, for example, she'll, she will, becomes shall, which is a perfectly good English word. It just means absolutely nothing like what you meant to say. Finally, avoid doubling contractions if you can reasonably do so. It is the most informal use of contractions, so dial it back. All right, here's some practice. Form the correct contraction for each of these sentences. By this time tomorrow, we will be in London. You are not going to eat that. Do you think they will like our presentation? Amelia is very angry with you. We are not trying to cause trouble. I am sure she would help if she could. Matthew will not be joining us today. It does not look like it is going to rain. Are you all right, madam? Let us go camping this summer. And by the time the sun rose, we had already been at work for an hour. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. You ready? Here are the answers. By this time tomorrow, we'll be in London. You're not going to eat that. Do you think they'll like our presentation? Amelia's very angry with you. We aren't trying to cause trouble. I'm sure she'd help if she could. Matthew won't be joining us today. Remember, that's your exception contraction. It's not won't, it's won't. It doesn't look like it's going to rain. Are you all right, ma'am? Let's go camping this summer. And by the time the sun rose, we'd already been at work for an hour. And that's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. Educator.com